Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm your host, Ross McCorkle, and above me here on the screen is my co-host, Joe Clark, and we're going to be deep diving into the three biggest topics of the week for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obviously, the big one, and the one that we're all going to be talking about for the next week or so at least, is the 2024 schedule reveal. We already knew the opponents dating back to the end of the season because it's based on a formula and you can kind of predict those things out. But now we have the actual order in which they will play the games, and it is a bit of a doozy for the Steelers. Joe, why don't you kick this one off and just kind of give some of your initial thoughts on the schedule, any quirks that may, be present in there, and kind of just your overall thoughts there.
Yeah, well, first of all, no divisional game until week 11 is crazy. It's absolutely bananas. I've never seen anything like it. I think what was it? The latest they had played a divisional opponent was like week 8, and it was like 1991. The latest I had found dating back to like 2002 was week 7, which had happened twice. So week 11 is just unheard of. Like you're cramming in 6 divisional games in your last 8. It's difficult. But at the same time, maybe it works in their favor. I'm not as high on the idea that it might work in their favor just because, as I'm sure we'll talk about, there's just not a lot of rest in that schedule either. There's a lot of short weeks built in. And then your two non-divisional games in there are on the road against the Eagles, where they've traditionally struggled at the Lincoln Memorial Stadium, or Lincoln Financial, and then at home against the Chiefs on Christmas. So home game, but how many people are going to be showing up on Christmas? We'll see. Steelers fans are kind of crazy. Maybe it'll be a packed house. But your two non-divisional games on that slate are not easy, and then obviously divisional games never going to be easy, especially with how talented the AFC North has been. So that's definitely the most noticeable quirk that stands out. But I do think the front part of their schedule is not easy, but I think there's a path for them to win 6 or 7 games in their first 9, and then you have to win 3 or 4 to get to 10 wins and be a playoff team. But yeah, definitely was not thrilled when that schedule was revealed yesterday.
Yeah, and you don't want to throw out any definitives this early in the process. So much can change. I mean, we saw that last year with the number of backup quarterbacks that the Steelers ended up facing. Some teams are going to overperform expectations. Some teams are going to underperform expectations. It happens every season in the NFL. And so, all we can do in May, as we sit here right now, is look, and it doesn't look like the most friendly schedule to the Steelers. And yeah, with what you just said there about some of the short weeks, I think even more notable about the 2 short weeks the Steelers have, one being a normal Thursday matchup against the Cleveland Browns, and the other being the Christmas Day matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. I believe the Baltimore Ravens precede both of those 2 short weeks, so the Steelers are going to be coming off of what is widely known as one of the more physical and kind of taxing rivalry matchups in the NFL, and heading into a short week where they have only 3 days of rest before playing their next game. And both of the opponents, following that short week are not exactly easy matchups either. The Cleveland Browns are obviously a rival and have that great defense, and the Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champions. That is about as tough as it gets in terms of the pair of short weeks that the Steelers have. I do tend to think that I think Matthew Marksey put that post up this morning on the site about, maybe the NFL actually did the Steelers a favor by backloading the divisional matchups. And while it is really weird and we don't really have a great example to look at in the past of how the Steelers performed in a similar, scenario, I think the way that the team is, there's just so much new stuff on offense. In particular, you got new quarterbacks, you've got a new offensive coordinator, so it's going to be a complete new, offensive system. You've got some new, wide receiver weapons. You've got an offensive line that's going to have some new faces that are probably going to be starting right away, if not very shortly after the season begins. And these things need time to gel. So maybe it's a good thing. That's kind of the other side of the coin. Maybe, the Steelers are more likely to have their offense figured out by the time they start facing some of these division opponents, and maybe that works into their favor. But certainly an odd schedule overall, and probably not the most friendly. If I think Dave said last night in our chat, if you gave me 10 or 100 tries to predict the schedule, he would not have had this scenario in any of those predictions, and I tend to agree there. So we talked about the brutal back half. We talked about the division games. We talked about the Ravens preceding those. The Steelers have 4 primetime games as it sits right now. What are those? They're playing the Browns. They're playing the Chiefs on Christmas Day. They're playing the Cowboys. And what's the other one? The Jets?
You got the Jets and the Giants.
Oh, so is there 5 on the schedule right now? I guess the Chiefs is kind of a...
The Chiefs, I don't think the Chiefs necessarily counts as primetime, even though it is a standalone game because it's just a 1 o'clock Christmas game.
Yeah.
But they have 4 of those, primetime 8 o'clock starts, starting with week 5 against, they got 3 and 4 weeks. They got 8 o'clock against Dallas, and then week 6, so that's week 5. Week 6, they're on the road in Vegas, is a 4 o'clock start. Week 7 is a Sunday night start against the Jets, 8:20, and then week 8 is Monday night against the Giants. So, both those games are home games. Might play in their favor, but it's three primetime games in 4 weeks is interesting. That's another one of those, maybe a little bit of those quirks, those scheduling oddities that we've seen this year.
Yeah, and Alex Kozora has an excellent, he has his stats of the weird every week during the regular season. He also he released a schedules of the weird edition with just a bunch of these kind of oddities. So check that out on the site. It's got a lot of kind of interesting quirks from the schedule packed into that article. One other thing that should be noted is the Steelers are traveling the 4th fewest miles in terms of their total travel this season. And I believe the first 2 weeks they're on the road with the Falcons and the Broncos, and those are 2 of their 3 longest trips that they will take. So they'll already have 30% of their total travel miles out of the way after the first 2 weeks of the season. Their only other real long one is out to Vegas to play against the Raiders. They're hosting the Chargers, so they don't have to worry about going out to LA. So that is something that's, somewhat favorable to the Steelers, though it's not something that's new. They typically do have among the fewest travel miles just because their division is so tightly packed in together. And they're just kind of in a more central location than some of these other teams that are out on the coasts. So that is a small silver lining to the schedule there. Now, Ryan Clark this morning brought up an interesting point about the schedule. And his angle was basically saying this is going to be a difficult schedule or situation for Mike Tomlin in particular. Now, we rewind back to last year, the 3-game losing streak. You're hearing a lot of chatter from national media guys and even former players, even Ryan Clark himself, saying that Mike Tomlin, may be on the outs in Pittsburgh, whether that's by his own accord and he just decides it's time to move on, or whether the Steelers ultimately decide that they don't want Tomlin back. Now, we're still waiting on Mike Tomlin's extension, and all signs point to that coming, sometime prior to the start of the season, so we can expect that coming up. But there has been a lot of pressure this offseason in general from, Art Rooney II, the team president, the team owner, saying basically we're getting impatient with the lack of playoff success. Now, this schedule is set up in a way where making the playoffs is going to be a pretty large feat in its own right. If the Steelers get into a scenario where they don't make the playoffs even, put winning a playoff game aside, if they don't even make the playoffs, is this going to be an uncomfortable situation for, Mike Tomlin?
Definitely might be uncomfortable. I think the extension is going to protect him. I don't think we're going to really have, if he does get that extension, which, I think we all assume that's going to happen at some point. It's just really just a matter of when, before the season starts. He won't be on the hot seat, but if they don't make the playoffs and they struggle, especially against some of these divisional opponents, the games where if they go 3-3, fine. But if they're below 500 in divisional games this year with that stretch that they have, people are going to be a little upset because, like Art Rooney said, they're impatient. The fans are impatient. Everybody's impatient. Have won a playoff game since 2016. So this is the year they kind of didn't necessarily go all in, but they revamped their roster to make it a point that, hey, we want to win now. So you get to this season and you don't win now and you struggle. Yeah, it might be uncomfortable. Is his job going to be at risk? Probably not. If he gets the extension, but there's going to be a lot more whispers and a lot more people who are like, all right, is Mike Tomlin really the guy? Is the game passed him by, whatever, than it would be if, they kind of fall, say they lose 2 games, the Browns and the Bengals back to back, week 13 and 14. That whispers are going to be pretty loud about where the team sits and where they stand. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, last year they went 5-1 against the division. Obviously, there's the injuries. Again, Burrow was hurt. You had, Lamar was out week 18. So it'll be interesting to see, but it could get uncomfortable. But I'm not really anticipating anything like he's not going to lose his job after this season or anything like that.
Yeah, and if they fail to make the playoffs, you would think, just how the schedule's set up, that it would come at the basically because of multiple losing streaks over the back half of the season. And DraftKings Sportsbook actually released their opening odds or opening spreads for all of the 2024 season for every team. And I went through and counted how many games they actually have the Steelers favored to win. And that list is pretty short. There's only 6 games where the Steelers are actually favored to win. That's against the Broncos, Chargers, Raiders, Giants, Commanders, and one of the Browns matchups. So they basically have the Steelers after their bye only favored to win 2 games. That would mean a 3-game losing streak and a 4-game losing streak. We saw how uncomfortable the season got last year after just a 3-game losing streak in December. This is talking about a 4-game losing streak shortly after a separate 3-game losing streak. So that, I think, would create a pretty hostile media environment for the Steelers and specifically for Mike Tomlin. DraftKings has their over-under set at 8.5 for the season for the win total for the Steelers, and they only have them favored to win 6 games. So basically they're saying, Vegas is saying, they're actually taking the under on the 8.5, where I think I read somewhere that like 90% of bettors are taking the over on that. Obviously given Mike Tomlin's track record of not having a losing season and all like that. So yeah, a lot that we'll continue to chew on in terms of the schedule as we go along here. The next, I guess it's about to be pretty slow this offseason in terms of not much more news coming in. So a lot of different ways to dissect this schedule, and this is just kind of the initial knee-jerk reactions. But moving into our second topic here, Cam Heyward apparently wants an extension and reportedly held out of some of the workouts. Now, these are voluntary workouts, so it's not a true holdout yet. He basically just is lightly putting pressure on the Steelers, saying that he does want an extension, and this is his way of showing that. I think on his podcast this morning, he said he is still participating in everything. He's still, doing everything he can to be ready for the season. He's still working out. It's not like a hostile holdout or anything of that nature. But you wrote some of the posts about this. Tell me a little bit about the Cam Heyward situation with him wanting an extension.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting from the perspective that, he's one of the team leaders. He's never skipped voluntary workouts in the past. And the fact that it is because he wants an extension, it adds, a layer to it. Do I think it's a big deal he's not there? Voluntary workouts? Not at all, because he's 35 years old. He's coming off an injury. He wasn't going to do much there anyway. Working on it his own is honestly probably better off for him, get his body right, figure out, individually on that basis what he needs. But the idea that he wants extension, he probably wants, a higher base pay in 2024. That's where it gets interesting. And I think the Steelers are going to do it, and they should do it. He's a leader. When he's healthy, he's still one of the best offensive linemen in football. And I mean, obviously, I think we all kind of default to Dave when it comes to, the contract, the cap, the money stuff. So he threw out just an example that the Steelers should give Heyward, an extra $6 million this year, and then tack 2 more years onto his contract, and it would drop his cap charge from this season by almost $8 million. And that would, probably appease him. He's getting more money this year. He gets the longer term commitment from the team. So that's a very plausible scenario that I think we could see unfold. I'd be shocked if they don't get anything done before training camp, even with mandatory minicamp coming up in June. Given that's mandatory, I don't think even if a contract's not done, Hayward's going to skip it, because he was very adamant in his podcast. He's like it's voluntary. He's like, I'm not skipping anything I'm supposed to be in. It's voluntary. But the one kind of line that stood out for me, and maybe it's a throwaway line, but I'm gonna read into it when you hear it. He's like, it's just contract negotiations, and I want to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. And he goes, but we'll see what happens. It's like at the same time, it's like maybe he doesn't want to give up his leverage. But we'll see what happens. That's a little bit ominous. So that's where it's like, all right, maybe things, if they don't agree, maybe if it's guaranteed money in 2025 or some, if this team and player don't agree, things could get a little bit messy. Um, but I mean, I'm kind of optimistic about this scenario. Like, I don't really think it's a huge deal, and I think they're gonna work something out. But I mean, we've seen things get messy in the past between the Steelers and their veterans, so I mean, it wouldn't be completely out of the realm of possibility. But I mean, the last thing this team needs after we saw the schedule release yesterday. There's a lot of question marks now. They don't need a distraction, so hopefully things get worked out with Heyward, pretty quickly in short order. And I mean, Omar Khan, he's a cap guy. I think he's going to find a way to work it out in the best interest of team and player.
Yeah, and I don't think that there's going to be any scenario where this becomes a distraction. I'd be shocked if he sits out of the mandatory stuff. And as far as the extension goes, I'm for it as long as, I mean, last year he was playing on, in his own words, he said, I want to get back to doing on two legs, or sorry, he basically was saying, I've been playing on one leg and want to get back to being full strength following his surgery there a couple months back. So he still showed a lot of, he has, his bull rush was fine, and he still was probably the best Steelers run defender along the defensive line last year, even with one leg. So in terms of his abilities, I mean, yeah, he's aging, and he could start to fall off that, age cliff any year now, but there hasn't been a real sign of that outside of him playing literally injured last year. And so I'm in favor of extending him just because, I mean, the Steelers only really addressed the defensive line in the 6th round with Logan Lee. They brought in Dean Lowry, a veteran in free agency, and they're set for this year in terms of their depth. But next year, I think defensive line is going to become the top need. Depending on what happens with the quarterback situation, that could be it. But defensive line certainly high up on the list next year, and it would be real nice to have a situation where Cam Heyward, a real leader of the team, a guy who would take another defensive lineman under his wing, is still around when the Steelers make the investment in one of these defensive linemen high up in the draft, which should be next season. So I'm in favor of it. I think he can still play. I think he can still provide stuff to the locker room. I mean, he's kind of the last holdover in terms of the old guard of Steelers. Really, I mean, he's the oldest player on the team, or he's the longest tenured player on the team now, I believe, by a good margin. So I'm in favor of it, but, we'll see. I don't think it's going to become too much of a distraction, and our Dave Bryan will keep you guys up to date on the salary cap stuff on the site, so be sure to check those out. Those will trickle in over the next couple months up until something, if anything, happens, until something gets done there. So moving on to our next topic, ESPN, Mike Clay, I believe it was specifically, released a list of projections. He does these every year, and it's kind of individual player projections, team-wide projections, all of that stuff. And right off the top, he does have an interesting division of labor between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. It looks like he has Russell Wilson playing in 13 games and Justin Fields playing in 4. Obviously, this is a projection. He doesn't get into the details of if that's an injury or if Justin Fields just earns the job at some point in the season or what it might be. But it kind of interesting just to see that there is a projection stating that Justin Fields will eventually start a handful of games for the Steelers this season. And the other thing, he had Russell Wilson at 2,901 passing yards, which, just pulling up his career passing yards, that would be his career low. So obviously that would be a disappointment for him to be minting a new career low at this point with some of the hype that's been surrounding him and the new Steelers offense this season. What are some of your takeaways from the ESPN Steelers unit and kind of team-wide rankings?
Yeah, I'm sure there's some sort of formula that Clay uses that goes into this. So I did think it was interesting that he had Fields starting 4 games. We've heard some people say, maybe Fields wins the job, maybe the athleticism's too tantalizing. I mean, I think Wilson's gonna. The team's messaging has been so consistent. I think Wilson's gonna win the job, and he's not gonna lose it unless he really, really struggles. In this case, the projection is 2,913 yards, 15 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Yeah, that wouldn't be great. So yeah, if that's what he puts up, then they could pull the plug. They might pull the plug earlier than after week 13 if those are the numbers. Um, I did think it was interesting though that he had the defense as the fourth best defense in the league. He's very high on the safety unit and the interior defensive line, which I was intrigued to see the unit he has unit grades, which is basically I'm pretty sure it's 0 to 5. So the interior defensive line was a 3.3, the edge was a 4, and safety was 3.4. So those are pretty solid units. The one thing I think is the offense is ranked 27th. Now you can't put too much stock in it as we sit here today because I'm pretty confident that more additions are coming. So the wide receiver unit grade was 0.5, which yeah, you're counting Van Jefferson as the team's second most productive receiver at 28 receptions for 403 yards. So the receiver room right now isn't anything special. You don't think you're going to get anything um out of it. Like where we sit now, I don't think it's really a fair grade because it's not complete. But yeah, the offense, we'll see. I mean, I think he's a little bit lower on Wilson and Fields than at least than I am right now. But they're two very volatile quarterbacks when it comes to looking at where they sit. But I think a lot of it is also a byproduct of their situation. Coming to Pittsburgh, I think there'll be an upgrade over Kenny Pickett. Those numbers that Clay put out are, they kind of look a little bit Kenny Pickett-esque. I think they're going to do, they'll be better. So I think it's a little bit of an underestimation, but we'll see. Again, it's just May. So once we get closer to the season, I think we can kind of make a more broad prediction of where they're going to sit when the roster's really filled out.
Yeah, and what they had no 1,000-yard rusher, which would
Yeah.
be a shock, kind of a shock to most people. Najee Harris is 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. Whatever you want to say about his efficiency, he has reached the 1,000-yard mark all 3 years. The first running back to do that since Alfred Morris to start his career. He's been extremely healthy. He hasn't missed much time. I think they have Harris at 892 rushing yards and Warren at 599. So I think that would be both players taking a small step back, or Jalen Warren staying roughly where he was at. I think he ended up with a little over 1,000 yards from scrimmage, including his receiving, and it looks like they have him just shy of 1,000 yards from scrimmage this season. So really, you're looking at a complete step back for the offense in rushing. Now you add the quarterback rushing, which they've got, almost 500 yards between Wilson and Fields, so that'll help the total there a little bit. But yeah, I think it's a little bit brutal to look at this where we sit right now and just, there's high expectations especially with the new offensive coordinator. I mean, people put a lot of the blame on Matt Canada. He's not around anymore, and so if the offense truly doesn't take a step forward like these projections kind of indicate, then I think there'd be a lot of people that are pretty worked up over that. So I don't really know. Their win projections here. I talked about the DraftKings.
It's 7.9, so that would be an 8-9 season basically. And I think he did the whole AFC North. He had him coming in last in the AFC North with this, which 8-9 and last in the AFC North would be a huge letdown. Like no two ways about it.
Yeah, they only have the Steelers with a greater than 50% win probability in 5 of their games. There's a couple games that are right on the fringe there at 49%, but that's even less friendly than DraftKings having 6 games where they're favored. ESPN saying there's only 5 games where they're truly favored. So the going back to the difficulty of the schedule, it's going to be a tough year for the Steelers. They have in a lot of ways an upgraded team, but they're facing just a way more difficult slate than they did last year, and that's kind of where we're just gonna have to wait and see how things shake out. Are they able to overcome the tougher schedule, or do they end up basically staying where they were last year with a bad offense and a good defense and just not able to get over the hump there? So That's all of our topics for today. We did want to get to one listener question here, and this one is from Mike. I'm not sure where Mike is from, but this is a reminder to everybody. Please do give us a call at 412-254-3145. Leave us a voicemail with a question for a chance to have your question answered on a future episode. And this question was actually asked a couple months back, but it's a little more topical now with the schedule release. So let me pull this up here.
This year. My question is, how many wins do you think the Steelers will have this year? My name is Mike. Thank you.
All right. From Mike, how many wins do we think the Steelers will have this year? I haven't gone through game by game and made exact projections yet. Probably will do that at some point during the offseason, just a full kind of season projection from myself, and I'm sure a lot of us on the site will do the same. But Joe, do you have a just rough kind of record prediction for Mike here?
Yeah, I mean, I went with it a couple weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago at this point. I think they're a 10-7 team. The schedule, obviously it's hard in the second half, but we knew who their opponents were going to be, and a good team wins, regardless of how the schedule shakes out. And if you think they're a 10-win team before, the games are put together, then they should be a 10-win team after the games are put together. So, yeah, things look a little bit more difficult now, the divisional games stacked together, but if they win 6 or 7 of their first, 9 games, then they can easily win 3 or 4 in the back half and get to 10 wins. So I'm going to stick with a 10-7 prediction. I think they're talented enough to do so. I think there's still, additions coming to the roster to fill out some depth, maybe add another receiver in there. So I'm going to stick with that. It definitely, I think people are more down on the Steelers today than they were yesterday before the schedule came out, but the talent level is still there. So regardless of how things shake out, and it is pretty brutal, I think, but I think they should still be able to win 10 games.
Yeah, I think when we briefly went over this a couple months back on, I think it was the first episode of the show, I think I also had them at 10 wins. I think I'm going to lower that to 9 and just have them at 9-8. And, it'll be anybody's guess whether that qualifies them for the playoffs. Sometimes 9-win teams do end up making it in. It just depends how the rest of the conference shakes out. But I do think that back half of the schedule is going to be pretty brutal, playing the Ravens and then going on these short weeks. That's not doing them any favors. Yeah, I think 9 wins is my projection, but I'll post a more complete analysis, and maybe that will change a little bit in either direction a little bit later in the offseason. That is all we have for the show today. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, give the phone number there at the bottom of the screen a call. Leave us a question. We will answer it in a future episode. I'm Ross. That's Joe. Thank you guys for tuning in.